The 80s had the General. The 90s had John Gilligan. In the noughties, it was the reign of Martin Marlowe Hyland. His was a familiar path with success and power, and then the recklessness. He had to go, because with him, an innocent young man doing an honest day's work died. Crime World presents Caught in the Crossfire, the unsolved murders of coke kingpin Marlowe Hyland and innocent Anthony Campbell. Available now on all podcast platforms. Rob, can you tell me, before we get into the proper details of this smuggling racket we're going to talk about, just a little bit about your background and how you met Sue? Because it's an amazing story that sort of dropped into the podcast briefly, and it made me want to go back and look at some of your earlier work. So just give us a little brief outline about that.
So I think in 2000, I think it was 2000, the end of 2015, or so about September 2015, I decided to kind of leave the rat race. I'm a former soldier. I spent a long time in the British Army, and I was just, when you come out of the army, most ex-veterans will tell you, or veterans will tell you, they just go from job to job to job to job to job. And I didn't want to be in that rat race. So I decided on the back of a trigger to just go help people that needed helping. And I ended up working with child refugees on my own. I'm not part of an NGO, and I've been doing that ever since. And I think what you're getting at is the incident that happened on October the 24th, 2015, which is at 20 past 11 at night. As you can see, it's not really burnt into my memory that well.
Yeah.
I decided that after probably, quite a substantial amount of time working with children and just seeing the absolute squalor that was that refugee camp back in 2015, I just had enough. I'd got to know a little girl that was, she was a beautiful little girl, and I couldn't leave her there anymore. So I arranged with her family. There was a lot of research into finding her family in the UK, and I agreed to try to get to the UK illegally.
And you were put before the courts, and that's where you and Sue originally met, because Sue, you were covering that case, is that right?
Yeah, so basically I picked up the papers on a Saturday morning and saw this case sort of splashed across the headlines across the UK. A former soldier had sort of had been stopped at the port in Calais. They'd found this little girl sort of in the back of his van, and it was
sorry, Sue, to interrupt, but just please explain it that I have built. I had a lovely sleeping compartment. You make it sound like just bunging in the back of the van. I mean, it was, although it was instant, it was well thought through in terms of her comfort and safety.
So basically, I'm a journalist, and I've spent a lot of time in Yorkshire. Rob's from Yorkshire, so I was kind of immediately fascinated by what had driven him to do it. Really, how it was portrayed as a moment of madness. Obviously, he'd got to know the little girl's father on the camp, and the family were lived in his hometown of Yorkshire. So he kind of agreed to this just in this one moment around a campfire in France. And there were a lot of journalists interested in this story, but I guess proximity, because I was just kind of in Yorkshire.
There's a story to that as well, really, Sue, isn't there? So at the time, I was surrounded in media, and I was hiding from media. I was trying to get away from media. My street was a mass it must have been a quiet news week. That's all I can tell, because the focus on it was global. And then one early Saturday morning, tap, tap, tap on the door, and it was Sue. And she caught me off guard. If I'd known she was coming and she was a journalist, I wouldn't have known. However, when I was a little boy, me and my friends had a hero on television, and we used to call him Action Austin. And that was Sue's dad. So That's how she got into my front room.
Wow. And look what's happened since. And I think, of course, what came out of that story, Rob, that yours was a complete act of compassion and kindness to those people. You felt their desperation. You wanted to get that little child to the family in the UK. You wanted to help them. And that all became very apparent. And obviously your good nature and your moral compass came out within that. And I think very much so it can be felt in To Catch a Scorpion, which is the series, the Intrigue series on BBC Radio 4, which we're going to talk about, and which is, you two came together as journalists and I suppose focus of media attention. You have obviously become friends. You've worked together. You work together so well. The first thing I wanted to say to you, Sue, is can I have Rob? I mean, what an amazing guy to work with. You're delving into...
Not always. He does have a downside.
Does he? Go on.
He doesn't stop working. That's the thing. That's his downside. So
that's his downside.
His downside is he doesn't very much sleep, and he goes at a right pace. So it's hard to keep up with him. And it would tax people, I think, because he's very enthusiastic and always kind of making contacts and always out and about chatting to absolutely everyone. And I love it. Of course, I love it. I'm really privileged to work with him, and we've become great friends. So, which I think really helps in the podcasting. It really comes across. But we have different ways of doing things all the time. So
that is typical of our relationship, because I'm doing this Zoom call on my phone and some bozo was just ringing me at the very moment where Sue is saying really nice things about me to my face, and I've missed it all. As usual, it's just like, I have to wait till the next interview now.
Now, what you can do is, once this goes up on YouTube, you can just keep rewinding that little bit and you can play it on loop over and over again,
I will do, just there,
over and over again. But nonetheless, so let's talk about To Catch a Scorpion. And I've listened to this podcast from start to end, and it is absolutely fascinating. It focuses on migrant smuggling, which I've noticed more and more is kind of coming to the fore when we see these Europol reports about, organised crime, the levels of it. There was a recent report where they identified 851 top-level organised crime groups operating in the area, in the regions, and definitely migrant smuggling. You can see smuggling gangs are coming up. They're clearly, when you look at what's happening across the world, going to become more and more significant all the time. And they're from a very dark and shadowy world. Difficult one to break into as journalists when you're looking at trying to break into regions like Turkey, Iraq. Difficult places to work in, difficult places to make contact. I think, Rob, that's what you brought to the table a lot, probably from your military background.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing I keep saying, any veteran will tell you, one thing that the army teaches apart from discipline is to keep going, but keep going carefully. What am I trying to say? Not to give up. Drawing all your experience of NATO exercises that you might have been on and contact. I'm waffling now, but I'm trying to think.
I think it's like that. Rob is looking. He has a real ability to. Probably should have been a policeman, but maybe that is combined with the army training a bit. It's a real ability to sort of judge situations, to see things that I'd missed, to know instantly. Yeah. To sift through sort of lots of waffle to get to the truth. He's got an absolutely amazing ability to be able to be 10 steps ahead. So it's a really unique thing that helped us, because we started off with this mad dream of catching one of the sort of most prominent, most well-known people smugglers who was on the run. He'd been convicted in his absence in October 2022, and police across Europe were looking for him. And we just I had great faith that Rob, if anyone could find this guy, Rob has contacts in the migrant communities that maybe will speak to him, that won't speak to police. And we just thought, why not give it a go? He's wanted across countries. Mm-hmm. We stand as good we stood as good a chance as anyone. We we're a bit naive, but we just wanted to give it a go.
You were following a trail, and sometimes you were almost nearly just following crumbs, but you followed them, and you got to where you got to places that the listener will be brought along with you. I think it's interesting, though, the mix of those two backgrounds, and I've worked with ex-military before when I'm working in journalism, and I think journalists tend to be quite high risk, actually. And I do think sometimes when we're on a job and we want an end that we will probably take a risk that when you're working with military you'll be drawn back a little bit, and maybe that's a bit too risky, and I think it works very well together.
I
think it's all right looking at something that's risky. Going towards something that is risky is not a problem. Rushing in to something that is risky without careful consideration, that's where the danger lies. And Sue is a brilliant producer, and Sue is brilliant in the field. But I think you've highlighted a really key part to our relationship is exactly that. I'll look at something that we're going into, and I'll give it a full overlay. I'll really think about it. Whereas, I'm sure I don't want to speak out of turn, but I'm sure you'll agree with me. So you want you want in story out air.
Yeah, no, that's definitely right. And even it comes down to sometimes in the people we interview on the search. I think there are times we've reflected it in the podcast actually a couple of times where we kind of had very differing approaches, and where we kind of like argued the toss a little bit. We didn't really come to blows, but my inclination is more to sort of kind of want to go in and get this, confront people, actually sort of grapple with it and get answers. And Rob's way is much more let's think how we approach this situation, and it just works. I think it just works. There's a mixture sometimes of both of the approaches, but I think
Sue's approach is really good if you're looking for gossip at a flower show. You can get in, get out. But when you're hunting down, and make no bones about it, there are a lot of human trafficking networks. Barzan Majid's network was one of the biggest ones, and he ruled the roost by fear and scaremongering. He was a dangerous guy. So every step, although on the podcast we might sound like it's all blasé and all that, behind we really are taking careful steps. That's why it probably took so long. So we didn't really allow ourselves to rush in and say that's him over there, let's go get that guy.
And look, in any case with any of these organised crime networks, be they involved in drugs, people trafficking, cigarette smuggling, whatever, if they see you as somebody who is going to cause a risk to their millions, to their money, to their operation, you are in danger. End of story. So maybe let's go back to 2022, and Barzan is, in his absence, convicted in a court of people smuggling. What do we know about him, his background, and how does he end up in that court in the first place?
What we knew really was from the National Crime Agency that we knew that he'd lived in England for a decade, from 2006 to 2015. We knew that he'd entered Britain illegally in the back of a lorry, and he claimed asylum, stating to the authorities he was from Iran. He's actually from Iraq. So he came in as a 20-year-old, gave a false name, gave a false country of origin. And it took almost a decade for the UK authorities to deport him. This is going way back before his conviction for people smuggling. But even whilst he was in the UK, he had a string of serious offences, drug and gun-related offences. And really, he only actually ended up being deported because he was in prison, having been arrested for one of those offences, when he phoned his mum and he used the Iraqi dialing code, and they realised that they could pin him to Iraq and they could deport him. So he was deported in 2015, just at the time when, it's actually at the time, funnily enough, where we started this interview, because it was the time when Rob was in the camp in France, time when people found millions of people trying to get to Britain, were on the move, were displaced people. And there was a huge mass of people in France waiting to get to the UK. And Barzan was kind of at a loose end. He'd been deported from the UK, and his brother, coincidentally enough, had a people smuggling business and was himself just about to start a long prison sentence. So he handed his people smuggling business to Barzan Majid, the brother. and he saw ways of growing it. He quickly adopted the use of sort of dinghies, small boats across the channel from 2019. And that's how me and Rob first became aware of his name, because we were together doing a different programme, and we saw a little girl, Marianne, who's 7, and she'd just been rescued from a boat. And it turned out, we didn't know this at the time, but police eventually pinned that crossing to Barzan Majid, along with, he was originally charged with 131 counts of people smuggling. But that on this crossing, there were children, like Marianne, who nearly died. It was a second-hand boat, no life jackets. And so that's kind of what we knew at 2018. But Rob actually knew a lot more, because he knows a lot more about the gangs and how they operate. So that's probably a good point for him to...
Absolutely. So I was going to ask you, Rob, if you can, for the listeners, maybe describe what it's like there in Calais, who these people are that are gathered there, and how do the smugglers move amongst them? What are they promising them, and what sort of money are they making?
Well, yeah, Calais and Dunkirk at the moment are very different to what it was in 2015. It's a lot more spread over the area. So instead of being, isolated in one area in Calais in 2015, 16, 17, there were 10,000 migrants in one area on the dunes. Nowadays, it's you can have the same amount of people, but they're spread over a larger area in little isolated pockets, and so it's much easier for what I call facilitators, who are the smugglers' eyes and ears on the ground, to mingle among people wanting to get to the UK. That said, though, by the time a migrant or a refugee has got to the camp, the deal has been done way upstream. Mm-hmm. So all they have to do is find the name of the smuggler, or usually an AKA of the smuggler within the camp, and that's usually done in things like food lines. So there's NGOs that give out food out the back of a van. There'll be a long line of refugees and migrants waiting to get food, and that's where a lot of little communications are taking place. So, for instance, a refugee or a migrant in the camp will find his smuggler that he's been told to find. That smuggler will go away and make sure that the money that the network are charging, say it might be 6,000 euros to cross the channel, is with the Hawala banker. So the migrant and refugee has sent the money to the Hawala banker. Once the facilitator on the ground gets word back from the Hawala banker that, yes, the money's there, he'll go back to the migrant and say, right, we've got your money. It's safe. It's in, what's that word called, Sue, when it's in a holding account?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's been held. And basically, they can't release. It won't get released until the migrant's safely in the UK. So basically, if the deal doesn't go through,
at this point, the smuggler or the network do not have the money.
They have a code, I presume, or they will get a code to unleash that money once the sort of the people have arrived at their destination.
It's not a code. It's a phone call from the refugee or the migrant. He phones the banker. I'm in England. Pay the man.
Okay.
And what these smuggling networks do, they do rule through fear, because they say, well, if you get to England and you don't make the phone call, we know where your family are, we know your children, we know where your mother lives. And I've seen firsthand the repercussions of a migrant or a refugee that doesn't pay.
And how police really realised the extent of Barzan Majid's involvement in the smuggling was because, as Rob says, the numbers are stored on the phone, and thousands of migrants arriving in the UK, when they're picked up by Border Force off the boats, they have their phones taken from them, and thousands of migrants have Barzan Majid's number, and it was linked with an avatar of a scorpion.
Right.
And so, although the police knew very little about this main character at the top of this gang, they knew that through linking these images of the scorpion, that this gang was A, prolific, B, was ruthless, because they were starting to hear stories from some of the migrants arriving in Britain. They'd already witnessed some of the tragedies occurring, and that's all put together eventually in this court case in October 2022. But by then he'd fled. He got word of arrest of other gang members, we think.
So, Sue, had he come back to the UK after being deported, or was it Belgium? Because Brussels, of course, Belgium is the sort of the crossroads of Europe, isn't it? And a very important hub for this activity. And it's there where his brother is living.
So basically, this was a huge international police operation involving the National Crime Agency in Britain and their officers, and police officers in Belgium and France, actually, in Germany. And his case, some of the cases were prosecuted here in Britain of other gang members associated with Barzan Majid. And Barzan Majid's case was prosecuted in Belgium. That's a really interesting question about where he was. I mean, we started off with knowledge of the court case, but no one knew for sure where he'd been operating from. So that was kind of something we pieced together by Rob's contacts, mainly in the camps. We were able to, we've made contact with people who were planning the journeys, and he told some of them he was in Turkey. I had a big base in Turkey. So we gradually kind of hone in on where his operations were being conducted from. But obviously people slip in and out cross borders with such ease. Someone at the top of the smuggling gang, where they actually operate from can vary week by week, and the authorities, have trouble chasing them. And
Rob, where Scorpion is sitting in the kind of as a gang leader, he will go on to deny this, I suppose, and always has his place in the gang. But is it a little bit like sort of the drug dealing networks? The higher up you go, the more remote you can be. You don't need to be in the regions at all, and you can probably direct your operations from the comfort zone of a region which will ignore it or not even see it as a crime.
100%. You know, someone at the top of a network can operate that network from his phone or several phones he might have. And certain people will have one phone number, and other people will have another number, and then migrants, refugees will have another number for the same person. But they can operate from anywhere in the world, and that's something that the NCA also noted, that it could be anywhere in the world operating and doing criminal damage to Europe, and in particular the UK.
And at the same time, by operating remotely and directing that gang remotely, they have to leave that digital, that communications footprint, really, which will ultimately lead police to them. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword.
It is a very double-edged sword, because the facilitators on the camp, the people who move people about and do the deals in the queues, they can take the SIM card out and snap it and get a new number and say, this is a new number. Snap it. They can, sometimes snap 3 or 4 SIM cards a day, but the people at the very top, they have to keep their numbers. So they might have 3 or 4 numbers, but they have to keep them, because it's the people at the top have to communicate all the way down the chain, and they can't be changing their phone number every sort of 2 or 3 times a day.
And sort of from a humanitarian point of view, it's interesting to hear, I suppose, people who've been involved in migrant smuggling suggest that it's just a necessary part of the modern world, and that these people want to get to Britain, or they want to get somewhere, and it's almost they're passing the buck slightly, like it's their decision. They're helping them, is how they see it, a lot of them. But of course, that's not the case. There's huge money in this, and a lot of people maybe who were once on those boats, in those vans and the lorries themselves, are turned, and it's all driven, really, is it, because of the vast amounts of money that is exchanging hands?
The amount of people and children and families that I've spoken to, and Sue she's heard the same. We didn't leave our host country. We didn't leave Iraq. We didn't leave Iran or Afghanistan with the one notion of getting to the UK. The reason the UK is so popular is because that extra leg from a European country to the UK is worth millions to smuggling networks, millions. So now the smugglers have a fantastic marketing strategy where they market to refugee families and migrant families in camps and on the trail by saying the only place to go really is the UK. It's so, they have their own marketing strategy, which no one's ever really got their head round. But the perception is that why do they all want to come here? Why do they all want to come to the UK? Well, that's the perception, but that isn't the truth. It's just simply not the truth. And I've seen this time and time again. And even Manna in the podcast, she's such a sweet girl. Even she said we didn't know we were going to the UK. We were pushed to the UK by the smugglers, and the reason is because that extra leg from the coast of France to the UK. In a human trafficking financial year is worth millions.
And because what we did know about Barzan Majid, what we were piecing together through Rob's contacts and people who were brave enough to speak to us, was that he was obsessed with money. He was absolute, and he, for instance, he would keep sort of thousands of pounds under his bed. He would, he lived the life with the cars and the women and the drugs and he, even though a friend was kind of pressuring him, saying, you should stop, you've made enough. We just, heard over and over the millions he wanted to make from this. He really saw an opportunity to make a lot of money and hoped to do that.
A few times I've been podcasting with Sue over the last 10 years, and the money's it's just vast. When you do the maths, the money's in vast. And I always said to Sue, why am I podcasting? Why am I working with you?
I know.
But
but thank God we're not all that way, because it would be a pretty nasty world if we were.
I know. I do joke about it, but yeah.
Talk to me about the kind of things that about the vulnerability of these migrants, the places they're coming from, their desperation for a new life. Many of them are people coming alone, men or women travelling alone, which have their own vulnerabilities, but a lot of them are parents trying to bring their young children to a place where they believe that they will have a brighter future. And that's their motivation in moving across the world to a place they don't know. What sort of risks are they facing because they have to deal with these smugglers?
Well, the risks that they're facing, they have no idea about. A lot of the people I talk to, and I've talked to over the last 10 years, they've never even seen the sea until they've been presented with an ocean or a sea with a smuggler. By that time, the smuggler has said, look, you can see the lights of Dover. It's just over there. It's easy. It'll be all right. You can see Dover over there. It's not a problem. They don't have perception. When they set off from the host country, I truly believe they don't understand the dangers that they're embarking on, because the amount of deaths that happen on trails, both women, children and men, that is not reported in the news is far more than you see, drownings in the Channel or the Mediterranean.
And also we kind of together have met so many people doing this journey, but in the podcast, obviously our interest was started by the 7-year-old Marianne, and then we later meet Miley, who's 6, her parents, and you talked about the dangers there. The boat she was on was sinking. They set off from the coast. We met her the morning she was rescued, and it had been sinking. And as the only English-speaking person on that boat, the phone had been passed to her to try and call emergency services to come and rescue them. And they were rescued, but then tried again at the hands of the smuggler a couple of weeks later. And she told us that crossing, she showed us actually burns on her body because the engine oil had mixed with the seawater and become corrosive. And as the boat was in danger, the engine oil was splashing, and she got these horrendous burns, which she showed to Rob. And it's so sad, like young kids terrified that they're in this situation, very, very badly damaged by it, and some lose their life. This isn't as of Barzan Majid, but Rob met a little girl called Hesty who was on a camp. She was going to die at the English Channel. With some terrible situations we've kind of heard and seen, and he's particularly witnessed.
And
Yeah,
They're cutting corners, these smugglers, Rob, aren't they? They're buying boats that aren't seaworthy. They don't give their passengers who've paid thousands for this safe passage, they don't even give them any inflatable device should the boat go, sink. I think you describe at one point where there is a terrible multiple tragedy. You described the wood that's left that was a boat carrying up to 90 human beings as not even being good for firewood.
72, was it 72 or 76 died on that boat? When we were looking at that, what I describe as bonfire, that was previously a wood. And I've actually got a piece of that boat, a piece of wood at my home. And I made a little memorial from a piece of wood from that boat to the victims of that boat. But, I mean, they're being let down at every single step of the way. You said it earlier, smugglers and human trafficking networks, because that's what they are, cut corners. They don't have corners. I think what we need to realise is that there is only one thing important to a smuggler or a human trafficker, whatever you want to. People get hung up on the word, but there's only one thing important to these people. That is how to maximise their profit margin by exploiting as much money under fear of repercussion if you don't pay, out of very, very confused and vulnerable people. And that's where the scorpion comes in, and that's why I felt, and Sue felt, that we need. He's free. He's got all these crimes against him. He's been sentenced in absentia. He's made all this money. This isn't right. And basically, we just set out and said we were so determined to find him, so determined that had we not found him at this point, we'd still be looking. We'd still be doing it.
Yeah. Whether you were still being paid or not, you would have been still out there trying to track him down.
What did you mention? What did you mention about getting paid? Sorry, I often say that to Sue when I get there. You see that giggle she just did there? And I said, "Oh, can I get paid?" I don't get paid.
Yeah, but look, let's just look at Belgium for a minute, because you meet a very interesting character there. And Sue, the last time we spoke, it was about another podcast of yours, $1 Million Lover, which followed the story of a wealthy Californian woman in her 80s who had fallen in love with a younger vagabond with a very interesting criminal history and a guy who was addicted to crystal meth, etc. This woman that you uncover in Belgium is an older woman. She is wealthy, personally wealthy, and she believes she is doing possibly good by these migrants. She's trying to help them, she believes, but I get a sense of it that she is being used. Or you certainly felt coming out of there. I mean, she spoke to you about what she was trying to do, but coming out of that home of hers, you believed that it was being controlled possibly, or it was somewhat being overshadowed by these networks.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it was actually an unbelievable situation for me and Rob to go into. We hadn't kind of been expecting it, and it was difficult at first to kind of work out what was going on, because Sonia told us herself that she believed people should get to Britain, that she thought Britain would be a safe place, and she was doing it from well-meaning intentions because she wanted to help refugees, migrants that she'd met in Belgium, who were trying to get to the UK. And she'd gone as far as to actually buy boats and put them on the boats on the beaches herself. But she was also hosting basically gang members who were taking migrants to lorry parks that we realised through the police were controlled by Scorpion and his gang. So the sort of overlays with the gang became more and more, and it was hard. And Rob actually took a daring mission up in the house itself to collect some of the evidence while I was.
Sonia was one of the most confusing and perplexing individuals I've ever met, because she does have a really strong moral compass, if you want to call it that, and she's full of compassion. And she did know to some extent the knowledge that on a night time they were sneaking off to the wagon park and trying to get him back into a wagon and then coming back and failing. And look, so she knew that. What became very apparent to me and Sue over a few days is she had no idea to the extent of the operation that was going on right under her house. And that operation we uncovered, span across Europe, in particular up to Brussels, where the hub was. As we unfolded the operation underneath it, it was immense. But I don't believe, and me and Sue have talked for hours on this, I believe she was guilty of being extremely naive and bordering on criminality and going over that line to some extent. But I don't think she has an idea of the extent of the criminality that's going on right under her nose. I'd like to think that.
And the Scorpion network obviously saw a vulnerability there and sort of hopped on it, shall we say. They are always opportunists, these criminal networks, and that criminal mind is an opportunistic one. And just when you think, have they not got enough, they'll take more. And I suppose taking advantage of her was taking even more.
Well, Sonia will have been groomed over a long period of time. This network didn't just move into there. Sonia would have been groomed and you know.
I mean, it's how these gangs kind of stay one step. Even it's not just Sonia. I mean, that is how they stay one step ahead of the law. Like, they're so quick to sort of adapt, to spot an opportunity, like you say. You know, they move with such ease across borders. They can exploit legal discrepancies between countries. They know how the police forces treat their crimes in different countries, and they exploit that knowledge. Rob's got a nice analogy, really, that about the ease with which these gangs move and how possible. Yeah. I mean, it is impossible to sort of catch them in a way. I mean, the police do, and thank goodness they do, but it's hard work. So, someone like Sonia never going to be up against a fair playing field there.
And I mean, you'd have to ask the question, why is somebody who's living in a country like Belgium wanting to move them on a step forward again to the UK? What is that? That's what you're talking about, that sort of narrative that they've sold, that the UK is the ultimate place to be, which doesn't actually make any sense. It's an extra step for them to make an extra load of money.
Yeah, it is. But also they are guaranteed jobs when they get here, because one thing the UK has never really managed to get on top of is the black economy. Which is a big attraction, and that we found out with a lot of the boys at Sonia's house is that they had this they've been told, and they have this true belief that if they can get to the UK, get to England via Ireland or via Dover, then they could get up to London and they could be earning up to £700 to £1,000 a week delivering food or working in the car wash, and that's out of their mouths. So what they're told is this. This is what they believe, and we all know that's not the case.
You've mentioned Ireland there. Just wonder, didn't want to throw it in without somebody else bringing it up. We're so colloquial, we have to know all about ourselves. But what do you hear about Ireland, and do you hear anything on your travels and within your own, I suppose, networks of contacts? Is Ireland an attractive place for illegal human trafficking? Is it a route to the UK, or is it also being sold as the dream within these migrant camps?
No, it's a route, from what I can tell. Although I would move to Ireland tomorrow because I think it's beautiful, but it's not about me. What I'm told is that it's an access route to mainland.
Right.
Yeah, it's an access route to mainland. Yeah.
Interesting. So, right, Scorpion is this. He's wanted basically he's sentenced in his absence in Brussels in the courtroom. They believe he's gone to sort of Iraq is kind of the idea where he is, but you believe he's closer to Europe, and you start sort of mooching about trying to find a few crumbs to bring you to him, and you eventually sort of track him down. The closest you get to getting near him initially is in Turkey, where he is sort of located for a long period of time.
And that was really exciting. I mean, it kind of, that whole sort of period in Turkey, we really felt, especially early on when we kind of got some help from a money shop. And we think it's from the money shop that he was using in Istanbul. I mean, the help was given anonymously, but we think, you know, from the conversations we were having in a sort of smuggler's cafe and in the money shop and things, we were hearing things and getting pointed in the right direction. And we kind of felt, once we got this address in Istanbul, we were so sure that we were kind of, on the right track. And then obviously we uncovered a sort of luxury villa in Marmaris and heard from a girlfriend there about how he'd been operating and the sort of lifestyle he had and the risk he was taking with migrant lives in those crossings from Turkey. So we were building up a really good picture that was taking us closer and closer to uncovering his whereabouts.
And obviously we don't want to spoil the podcast for anybody who's going to listen to it, To Catch a Scorpion, which is on the BBC Radio 4 series called Intrigue. But your investigations ultimately take you to Iraq, where I think, Sue, you, by means of gender, have to take a slight back seat, and Rob has to kind of put himself at the coalface into the more risky situations that you're maybe more used to in your job. But
you make it sound like that's not the norm.
There's plenty of places. I was listening to it getting so cross. I was walking with the dog listening to you, and women aren't allowed here, women aren't allowed there. I don't think I'd last very long. But you get very close indeed. And ultimately, you do end up tracking down Scorpion. And that's not to ruin the show for anybody, because it's a fascinating way you come to him. And I think you, Rob, come face to face with him. What does this guy look like? What does he? Is he what you expected when you eventually are standing in front of him?
I think I'll get to Scorpion, but I always talk about perception and reality of two different things, but people always steer towards perception, and the perception of upstream human traffickers, especially at Barzan's level, is that, they use the word gangs and they use the word smuggling and all that. Make no mistake, these people at the very top, like Barzan Majid, they are multilingual, highly educated, very well dressed businessmen. Now, it's an illegal business, but I'm always shouting from the rooftops, do not underestimate these people. They are not ragtag smuggling gangs. They are CEOs of illegal global businesses. And you don't become a CEO of any business without having a nous about you, without having something about you. Barzan struck me as very intelligent, multilingual, a decent education, and it's kind of a surreal situation to meet someone like that you perceive as a monster, because at the end of the day, I think if Barzan Majid had used his talents in a legal field, he would have done very well. But he didn't, and a lot of people got hurt because of his business talents. A lot of people, and no doubt some people died because of his business talents.
We often say that about people who are at the very top of organised crime, that, had they put their skill set into the legitimate economy, they would have been CEOs, etc. I think what sets them aside is that they don't lose a night's sleep about those people who die, about those children who've perished in the waters, about those families whose entire futures have been destroyed because somebody bought a boat that wasn't seaworthy to put them on. They're their customers, and it's like organised crime to me is the only business in the world where they don't care about their customers. They treat their customers with utter contempt, whether they're buying drugs from them or, you know, buying routes to a new life. It's the same thing. It's their human beings are a commodity. There are those that get to their destination and the losses are just put down as losses. And you do definitely need something in your personality or your makeup to allow you just to go and enjoy that money that was made on the backs of that misery.
Isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's a complete detachment, and that's born out of their mindset that like I mean, the Scorpion is a perfect example. Well, I didn't put those people in the back of that wagon. Well, I didn't put those people in the boat.
Mm-hmm.
And by being able to say that, he can convince himself of a detachment to remove any responsibility. But when you really forensically examine what's actually happened, maybe a death in the back of a truck or a death in the sea, and climb the ladder, you'll see that the whole thing started with the man at the top. In this case, the Scorpion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Just to finish, and this is a question that maybe you can't answer for me, or maybe we are somewhere with it, but
Sue can answer anything, don't worry.
Thank God. So, Sue, Scorpion is wanted for a prison term in Belgium. You have tracked him down, and you knew certainly where he was when Rob was looking into the balls of his eyes, right? So what has happened? Is there any efforts to bring him back to serve this sentence, or is he still living as a free man?
I'm so glad Sue got this question. Spoiler alert, do the right thing, Sue. What are you going to do? Give it away or not?
Well, so basically, the podcast has actually been like amazingly successful, more so than we kind of imagined. And we've had so many people wanting to know the sort of, we leave it, as you say, in episode 8. And so we are rushing now to bring out an episode 9 because things moved very, very quickly after the first 8 episodes were launched. I mean, it might be a spoiler, really, for me to say. So I think perhaps we were surprised by what happened. I was surprised. I don't know. I think me and Robert talked a lot about what would happen. And we played through different scenarios, and we kind of felt like we'd given it our really best shot to find him and confront him in a way that, you know, police and prosecutors had wanted to do and been able to. And we kind of felt pleased because we were able to go back to some of the victims and say, look, this is what we found out. You know, this is what we've been able to fill in for them, at least some of the sort of gaps that they had and questions they had. And so we felt like our job was done, but we literally could not have perceived the impact it had, and the way that authorities acted to try and then pursue our leads and you know, take things to actually deliver proper justice. So we're kind of confident now that there will be actual proper justice in this case, and the way it worked out we didn't anticipate. But
so we need to wait for episode 9. I'll be waiting for that anyway, I can tell you. And I would just advise anybody who listens to me to have a listen to this podcast because it's excellent. Intrigued to Catch a Scorpion. Thank you very much, Sue, and thank you so much, Rob. And
Thank you.
I'll give you a job on the side if you need one the next time I'm going out hunting for somebody.
Yeah, I will. I mean,
Yeah.
All you need to do is pay me £5 a week, and it's £5 more than I'm getting now, so I'll be there.
All right, okay. Listen, thank you both so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.